In recent years, conservatives in America have raised concerns about the leftward tilt of higher education. They argue that universities in America have become breeding grounds for ideologies which they deem as dangerous. Now, this past fall, the claims of the conservatives gained traction as campuses across America erupted with protests against Israel's military campaign in Gaza.
For 70 years, nobody really saw the truth. Nobody knows what the real story is.
They need to condemn what Israel is doing.
It's terrorism. That's all it is.
This was, of course, accompanied by very deeply hostile rhetoric against Jews. Many campuses from coast to coast, from Harvard to Yale to Stanford, MIT, you name it, some of the most prestigious universities in America and the world, were roiled by protests which was inflamed with anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sloganeering. Things even came to a head with groups of pro-Palestine and pro-Israel supporters having a physical go at each other. The situation escalated when leaders of elite universities who faced a series of challenging questions at a congressional hearing last week. The presidents of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania faced grilling from members of Congress on what they were doing about openly anti-Semitic inflammatory rhetoric that was being allowed on campus. This in the name of free speech, and all three were confronted with a series of challenging questions in this congressional hearing that happened in Capitol Hill. The moot question was, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate school rules? And the response of all three of them, the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and UPenn, or one would say the lack of a concrete yes to that question in response, has fueled Republican assertions that campus anti-Semitism was symptomatic of the radical ideas that they had been long warning about. Now, none of the leaders of these three universities were able to give a clear yes in response to that question, that calling for the genocide of Jews is indeed bullying and harassment and should be a violation of university rules.
We embrace a commitment to free expression, even of views that are objectionable.
Republicans seized this opportunity to cast liberals and their institutions as intolerant and hateful. Representative Virginia Foxx, for example, warned of the dangers tied to the race-based ideology of the radical left. She labeled these institutional anti-Semitism as a poisonous outcome of the cultural shift across America's campuses. Surprisingly, it's not just the Republicans. Some Democrats, too, have joined the criticism against these elite universities. President Biden's spokesperson denounced the three college presidents. Some Democratic officials, including Pennsylvania's Governor Josh Shapiro, have called for the resignation of University of Pennsylvania's president, Elizabeth Magill. Ms. Magill, in fact, subsequently resigned just a few days ago after her continuance was frowned upon by the Board of Trustees at the University of Pennsylvania. Even some prominent liberal business leaders have expressed regret for underestimating the severity of anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The anti-Israel protests on campuses not only have driven a wedge between the Jewish progressives and their allies, but also fractured the Democratic Party itself. Now, this issue has prompted politicians as well as business executives to question their associations with these very same institutions which they once were champions of or supported. Even President Biden's team is caught in this entire vortex of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric. They are genuinely afraid that this would eat into the younger vote bank of the Democratic Party. Many of the people who've been protesting on these campuses are young people who, of course, have been railing and ranting against Israel's war, many of whom happen to be Democratic Party supporters. This is the vote bank which President Biden desperately needs to come out on election day in November 2024. Biden currently trails his Republican challenger, Donald Trump, the former president, anywhere between 2 to 6 percentage points nationally. Today, if an election were to be held, Biden would lose the key swing states, and more importantly, he would lose those states because of this issue. The fallout has extended beyond the realm of politics as well. The Me Too movement has faced internal divisions. Now, more and more liberal women who were champions of the Me Too movement some years ago, like former Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg, have come out and openly questioned the rather slow and tardy response of feminist groups, of women's rights advocates and their institutions in addressing evidence that has been placed in the public domain that Hamas attackers on the 7th of October in that terror attack that completely shocked Israel used rape as a weapon of war. There's been radio silence by some of the most prominent champions of women's rights on that question of Hamas using rape as a weapon of war. On the presidential campaign trail, a topic that was largely ignored by the Republican contenders, the issue of campus wokeism has once again resurfaced after all of these protests and after last week's congressional hearing, which grilled the presidents of these three elite universities. Now, this shift is suggestive that the controversies surrounding anti-Semitism may actually rekindle efforts by Republicans to try and defund or at least restrict public universities. Now, there are public universities which dominate over state legislatures where Republicans can control the flow of funds to some of these universities. The critique of higher education is not new in America. Republican efforts to try and defund or restrict public universities have been gaining momentum for a long time now. More than 20 states have considered in the past of adding bills, restricting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, or simply having identity-based hiring practices. But Republicans have also clung on to some extremely fanciful theories which now they claim have been validated by the performance of the three leading academics that happened in Congress last week. They believe in a far-right exclusionist theory called the Great Replacement Theory, in which the populations who are part of the ruling elite will be deliberately and slowly removed from their positions of power, and in their place, migrants and people of color will be promoted. Now, this far-right, exclusivist, almost nativist theory was first articulated by the French author Renaud Camus, but it's now been seized upon by conservatives and Republicans in America to foment their long-held theory that white America is soon going to be made brown, that it's going to be less white and more brown with the inclusion of Asians and Latinos and other people of color. Dr. Jay Green from the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, sees the recent anti-Semitic protests on campus as a turning point. He compares it to the Zoom moment that happened during the pandemic, when parents were paying far closer attention and examining what their children were being taught in school because they were all sitting at home and taking Zoom classes. And what they found, that it was lacking in quality, it was lacking in content. Even expert commentators are accusing these elite universities of pushing political agendas, thereby missing the fundamental reason for the existence of these universities, which should be the pursuit of academic excellence. Many of these commentators are saying that universities should become less playgrounds for politicians to battle out ideas and more for a pursuit of research and higher education and academia. Today, a lot less young Americans, for example, think that a college education is a must for success in later life. Many students have been crushed by student loan debt that they don't see it as worthwhile paying the kind of costs, taking on the loans that they do just for 4 years of a college education. The underlying emphasis seems to be on race and gender inclusion, which of course is a noble intention, no quibble with that, but it does so at the cost of merit-based admission criteria. The campus divide over anti-Semitism has ignited a larger debate about the state of higher education in America. Regardless of political affiliations, many are questioning the ideological shifts that are happening in these elite institutions and the kind of impact this has on students who are enrolled there. As a fallout of this war continues, the spotlight on American universities will only intensify, and that will leave American higher education, which even today is coveted not just in the US but by international students around the globe. It will leave American higher education at a crossroads.